Okay, I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's a privilege to have Ishraq, Sitecore MVP, on this webinar session to take us through the Sitecore Headless CMS Content Hub 1. On behalf of SUG Chennai, I welcome and thank Ishraq for agreeing to spend time on this webinar session with us. I'm also happy to welcome all the participants to this session. And without further ado, Ishraq, the stage is all yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for having me. It's actually my pleasure to come back this year as well and share some of the learnings that I had with Sitecore. Please let me know when you see my full screen.
Yes, we are able to see your screen.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, so one of the main reasons why I actually picked up this topic, I spent a good amount of my time like the second half of last year and end of this year just strategizing with the clients on where do they see their current tech stack and where do they think their ecosystem gonna be in the next 3 to 5 years. And a constant discussion that we had during these workshops that we had was number one, headless being there's something that everyone is going to experiment with, right? And for those who have already been working on headless implementation, there has been a huge amount of investment been made towards doing a shift at a certain point into headless using like JSS, right? Back in 9.3. While a couple of years back, when we look where they are today, there's a good understanding that the entire experience was not like a really true headless one. It's more of a hybrid or semi-headless implementation. It also raised the question for the dev teams, and the question that I've always been asked by the department is like, my entire resources capacity are backend developers. Does this mean if we're moving to headless, we need to either hire front-end developers or make sure that our current backend team can write front-end code, right? And this was also like a constant question from these departments. Another question was, do we have to do this now? Do we need to shift everything that we have, all the investment that we've done, and just pick up one of these Sitecore SaaS products that they have offered us? Or it can be like a transition where we make more of like a conscious decision as we move towards that. So these are some of the things that we as a like community, as an agency, as someone who's been working with Sitecore, has been faced on almost day-to-day basis. Like, okay, now we have something called engagement to cloud, right? Now we're taking or shying away from a single platform that does everything. Again, XP and XM still gonna be there. They're not going away, right? They have been maturized to be at least on a close level with what we see now. But there has been this concept of shifting from a single platform that does everything into these smaller pieces. Now we have a commerce cloud that does different commerce stuff, and instead of having the commerce Sitecore commerce within your Sitecore XP. And still the main concept with this Sitecore offering, as we can see in the blue section, is content. So we have been introduced with XM Cloud, and with XM Cloud, we're talking about a cloud native CMS, and it's important that we make a distinction between XM Cloud and Content Hub 1, because the first question when they have released XM Cloud, and then it has been followed by Content Hub 1. Okay, what's the difference? Both of them are headless. Both of them or supports headless, let's say. Both of them are a SaaS products, and the main distinction is always keep in mind is Content Hub 1 is treated as a pure headless CMS, and we're going to talk about this in a bit. And then they have introduced like search, which is like the discover counterpart using AI powered search for content, opposed to products. And we have two different offerings for Content Hub 1 operations and DAM that we've heard about that recently, sometime back in November. And the main, let's say, dominant concept between all of these things is the shift towards kind of a tech stack or an architecture that looks something like this. So we're talking about headless or a hybrid solution of content as a service. As we all know, since Sitecore JSS, the way it has been implemented back at the day, and I experienced some of that work with some of the clients that we've done, Sitecore gave us two options, right? Either go with a Sitecore first or a backend first. The difference between both of them is the Sitecore first is still something that you as a Sitecore developer initiate and manage. So you go, you create your Sitecore pages, you define the components, we break it down as we know from a headless, kind of mentality. This is when it has been done backend first. It has been totally governed by the front end team. And we do not typically follow the same kind of mentality to group resources and the front end assets and components and all of that, or renderings from a Helix perspective. Now, the two different approach did actually affect the way content as a service has been delivered, because we still, when we talk about JSS or a headless or semi-headless in the application domain, and again, make a distinction. Now we're talking about an application versus a product, which is a CMS. JSS is a hybrid or a headless application, right? Content author are still going and authoring pages, right? They're still doing the orchestration of a page. They go in the experience editor, they add a JSS rendering and all of that, right? They still go through this process. While when we think about a headless CMS, we're talking about something purely separate. So it's a content, has nothing to do with page orchestration. We'll talk about this in a bit. Another thing to keep in mind is the way Sitecore has been looking into these products, right? Because with GSS, it started with this concept of having the JavaScript layer and the layout service, right? And it has been in subsequent 9.3 releases became like bundled with SXA, right? And this is when you look into any 9.3 JSS application implemented now and you go to the resources, you have them bundled together. While in 10.3, we have shifted a little bit, right? So we've taken out this tightly coupled between SXA and JSS, introduced the layout service as a standalone, right? And we have now a headless SXA implementation that's different from JSS. So imagine if you want to do an upgrade to 10.3, what consideration you need to take in mind. Again, we're talking about a headless application, while you are still the one responsible for these updates. You're the one who's responsible for evaluating the efforts that are needed to do this migration and make it compatible. And followed within this mindset, right, is the concept of APIs, because everything is now consumed through an endpoint. So your head, right, which is your front end application, is communicating with Sitecore through APIs. So the API has been shifted from our backend mentality, right? Because we've always been using APIs to integrate with third-party data, but now we're making this API first approach to be between two things I own, right? Which is my application and my CMS. we consume data, whether in a JSON format or a GraphQL, something we're used to, but it's still, these are all the new things that the digital experiences that we're building nowadays revolve around. So as you evolve as a developer or as an architect, you need to keep in mind that these things are no longer even tied to a front-end developer. You don't have to be a front developer to be familiar with these things. And we've been hearing about Jamstack architecture for a couple of years now. I think it's been a hype 4 or 5 years ago. And the concept around Jamstack architecture, and this is also something continuously we're saying, whether with everyone else, regardless they are Sitecore or not, and even with Sitecore partnership with providers like Vercel. So it's the idea of pre-generated pages, right? So you have your website, you pre-generate the HTML, your assets and everything, you put them on a CDN, and that helps you and use like something like Vercel or Netlify to do a deploy and provide your customers with almost like a static HTML version of your website. It's quick, it's cached, it's easy to like more security, like it's easy to protect against attacks and all of that. So this is where most of the applications nowadays are heading. For example, our website is following the same architecture. We use Headless CMS to do all of that. The new thing from my perspective was just focusing on writing content without seeing how that looks like, because the way this is done is like you do your content authoring, your front end or your Next.js or whatever application you have, it pulls this content, and that section has been deployed quickly through Vercel or Netlify to production. And you still gonna need to work on providing multi-experiences through personalization and A/B testing, right? Now, the added concern or option, I'm not going to say it concern, but like an added criteria or thing to look at is how am I going to do this using a headless approach, right? Because again, always keep thinking, okay, how this is done traditionally in XP versus how it's done with a SaaS product. And going headless, again, forget the SaaS, let's just stick to XP. Doing headless, and we need to think about how we roll out, for example, a JSS application and Sitecore, whatever version you have, right? In XP, you have two options. You either have the option to have your basically your CM CD, you install your JSS on the CD, and you just do your consumption of APIs between CD to the CM. This is one experience. Another experience, you have a reverse proxy, like a Node.js web app, in front of your CD. So your Node.js application calls an API hosted in the CD, then the CD communicates with the CM. Now, all the work, all the personalization, and all the tracking is happening on the Node.js. The main difference between the two is the CD, we know how that's done through Xconnect and all of these things, while it's being on a reverse proxy using something like Experience Edge, like Sitecore had to come up with the new ways to handle these things. And again, having everything in the cloud with the shift towards hosting almost everything, either using a BaaS or like Sitecore Cloud Managed Services. So this is how the tech stack nowadays looks like or aspire to look like. And if we put this within the concept of an architecture, and again, this is not a Sitecore specific, this is where almost go to LinkedIn, look into any other products that you're working on, there's always a mention to this kind of a MACH architecture. So based on what we've discussed so far, a MACH architecture is standing for microservices, API first, cloud native, and headless. So let's talk about each one of those and how we can contextualize this with some of the implementation that we already have. I have a client, they're a commerce website, and the operations of the inventory and all the commerce system is hosted in Oracle. And recently, and we're two teams, so we have the web team responsible for the Sitecore stuff. We have the commerce team who's responsible about all of these operations. Now, they have decided to shift from Oracle to a new system to handle all of the checkout process, loyalty program, ordering, and everything in between. What happened is that we were in the process of an upgrade to Sitecore 10, and we've been a little bit late, and there has been a disconnect in the efforts done on both ends. So by the time that they have already finished their upgrade to their system, so the new system, we've just released an upgraded version of Sitecore. Now we just need to start to do the upgrade and rewrite the code to work with the new APIs. So we've been in a position where they have everything need to be added to a UAT environment for testing. And we are in this dilemma where once the UAT is switched to work with the new commerce system, that means we're no longer able to release anything to production, because our production or our websites still need to consume all the APIs. And that means we either have to invest in creating a new UAT environment so we can continue our support process, or we have to freeze releasing anything to production or any new features or fixes until everything is fixed. So this is where architectures done using this approach comes into play. So in a situation like we had, if we think about these units, and again, I'm just using commerce for simplicity, but you can think about any example. So if we think about our commerce as we have a standalone .NET Core, I'm using .NET Core because I just want to still link that to our experiences. That's responsible for your loyalty integration with Shopify. We have a .NET Core application that's responsible for the checkout experience, a microservice or a .NET Core application that's responsible for all the integration for the ordering process. Now, putting this into account, take API first approach into it, all we need to do is to shift the endpoint that we are consuming between UAT and production. So in UAT, when we want to go through the checkout process, we'll request the API version 2, while if we want to be on a production, we're going to consume the same endpoint, the same API, same signature, same everything, but version 1. Add cloud into that mix, it means my API manager in this case is going to do this determination on my behalf. This means you do not have to worry about writing checks in your code to read settings that says like enable the new backend or the new commerce versus disable like the old one, right? Because you need somehow a way to determine like in UAT I want to display this code and in production I want to display this code. Now this has been shifted from your code because that's not the right place to do it into the cloud. So that's a decision that can happen very quickly. You do your changes, you even gonna change your loyalty program from Shopify to another loyalty program. All you need to do is for the API manager now to map to a new endpoint. So basically nothing has to be invested so much into rewriting code or writing lots of if else. That's going to be a nightmare for maintainability later on. Same thing with location, abstracting your business into this layer of APIs means your API manager can even decide which location you want to release this. And this is something constant that we face is sometimes we want to release the new version of the website just for the US market, and then we're going to roll this out to the rest of the world. And using your application gateway, it's going to do this determination of location, right? You don't have to, again, write that in your code. Everything is done on your API in your cloud level. So application gateway determine the location, you write rules in your API manager, and the function to say if the traffic coming from the US, use this endpoint. If it's coming from that, use that point, right? So lots of the headache of writing a code or a business that's tied to your application has been lifted into these different pieces. Makes it easier for you to integrate with anything you want in the future. And Headless works pretty much well with this setup because now you have your business mostly, and again, this is not the only way of doing things. Sometimes you still need to write business logic in your head, right, in your web application, but it makes it easier for you to even move on into a headless CMS that's going to handle your content. So Content Hub 1 is an example of a scenario where you want to make sure that you focus on the process of writing a content first approach, right? Versus worrying about how the page is going to look like when I integrate that with my APIs or when I do a deployment. It allows you to, from the get-go, start your phase one, and even before your team starts the onboarding process, right? And we start doing, like a Git repo, we start with the branches and all of that sprint zero stuff. Your content editor teams actually can just start with their content. They can even create the actual content gradually from day one. They don't have to wait on the entire implementation to be delivered so they can start that work. And this kind of mentality means there is no longer dependencies between the front end team, your dev team, and your content team on each other, right? I remember when Sitecore introduced S6, this has been one of the goals, is that we shorten time the release of our MVP by allowing content authors to go into the experience editor and using the toolbox, they can create pages and drag and drop. However, often we deal with different levels of content authors maturity. So you have a mature content authors, you have a project where you just hire content authors to write content, but then still you need to train them or allow them to be mature enough, or only use those who has enough knowledge to go into Sitecore and build these components themselves. So there's still an overhead on your content authors to know some sort of a design. While every time we go into a pure headless CMS, it means it's content and content only. Your content authors should only worry about writing content regardless of how that looks like. And this is the Content Hub 1 dashboard, or what's called Content Hub 1 home. As you can see, it's pretty much clean display of the options that you can have in this headless CMS. You can go ahead and create models. So again, when every time we work with something new with the Sitecore SaaS products, were introduced to new lingo. So it's might be the same concept, but different lingo for reference. So we have the opportunity or the option to create a model, which is like the templates, right? You can create your content, whether that's like pure content and pages or upload media. And since we're talking about headless and APIs, then there's definitely a section to create API keys. There is a quick section here that allows you to go to various documentations, and nice option here I think is it allows you to create a support case for this specific version of your CMS. So this means that because they already know what has been rolled out as part of this product version, they can look into these issues and they can fix it and roll it out for you without the need for you to do anything. Because this is one of the nice thing about having a SaaS product, is that it's 100% the responsibility of the product owner to deal with all of these upgrades or changes. When you want to implement this, you don't have to worry about these things. So as just mentioned, one of the main thing that is also shifted when we think about CMS, again, headless CMS and not an application as a CMS, it means your content author needs to ditch the design mentality not only content authored by you as a developer as well. Because every time we work with the Sitecore page, the first thing that we start to think about, okay, what page types we have, right? What kind of a layout I want to display? It's a single, sort of that. Is it a single page? Is it 2-column page? Is it 3-column page, right? Headless CMS takes the orchestration of a page, takes the worry of how the design of the page gonna look like, and just focus on delivering pure content. So content author doesn't have to worry about having, when they create an article page, should the image align with the content, right? Should it flow underneath it? Should I display a red, you know, asterisk for this is required or not, or to handle anything from a design perspective? They don't worry about that. And you do not have to worry about that when you design your APIs. Your APIs that gonna connect to the headless CMS and consume that and make it available in your application have to worry about how content authors created content and how you're gonna consume that. You're gonna worry about which model, right? Because we're talking about content model here. It's gonna be displayed in the header and the footer. You define that. So if you think about the example we've talked about GSS, between backend first or Sitecore first, we don't have this issue where if a front-end team has built the application, then Sitecore content author would struggle with building a page. We've been there, it's been a nightmare. And in certain cases, the result of doing an audit on some of these implementations was just like, you have to refactor, rebuild the entire thing because content authors has been struggling to just add a component to a page. While you're just removing this noise, you don't care about that. So you can build your application the way you want, using the language you want, right? And for Content Hub users, we have multiple types of stakeholders, right? We have a content modelers, and they're the ones who are responsible for creating your content model or a template. So basically, a model is a template. We have content authors who are responsible for adding content, publishing that, and we have the developers who are responsible for consuming the APIs, for building API keys and all the integration parts. That doesn't mean that you as a developer can't be on one of those. You can be the one who's doing everything. You could be just the one who's worrying about the integration part with the with Content Hub 1. So how does Content Hub 1? So remember the discussion we've talked about Jamstack and we talked about the MACH architecture. So the first layer in a Content Hub 1, we have our CDN. So again, think about your head, your application is generated, cached without any worry on a CDN. Then we have layer 2 and 3, which are the delivery edge and the media delivery. And these are two important components because, again, remember we've talked about the GSS. You can have your CM, your CD, right? And a reverse proxy or not. And a headless CMS architecture, we're taking out your CD. So your content delivery layer is no longer there. Instead, it's broken into two. We have the delivery edge, which is responsible for all the GraphQL API calls and content caching. And we have the media delivery, it's responsible for sending your media to the CDN. So this is an important distinction because now the engagement between your application and your content is shifting towards more and more abstraction. Then you have your Content Hub 1, which is your headless CMS. And obviously we have the APIs that allows the Content Hub, communicate between the different action when you're doing your modeling, when you're publishing, when you're creating your API keys. So how does all of this work? So your content creators, your content modelers, your content authors will only gonna work within the Content Hub one. They're responsible for creating models, uploading content, making sure it's published, and I mean published, made available into your delivery layer, which is either the media or the edge. And the front end team are responsible for all the presentation. So this part is completely about content, no presentation, no orchestration, no nothing. All page orchestration, all page presentation, design, consumption is happened here, and that's handled by front end developers or even by backend developers. So we've discussed content modeling. Again, the reason why there's a huge need to understand this section is because, again, we've discussed with the CMS, we're moving towards a content-first approach, removing the design from it. So you want your content modeler to be able to look into how this page looks like, right? And then think about, okay, one of the action that I'm going to be doing from a content perspective is creating a news page. What do I need to have so I can have a news section that contains all the content I need, regardless of how it's going to look like, right? And creating a model in CMS1, it's called content type. So you need to create a content type that's called a blog post or an article. These content types contains content fields. Again, similar to what we know about fields, they need to decide if I need a string, if I need an integer, if I need an image in this section. And they need to have the ability to create relations between these content pieces. The reason behind that, and let's discuss in this. So there's what we call a design principle when we do content modeling, and this design is not what we know as a design. Again, think about design is like we used to build our databases, right? You need to have a database design when you build your content. So we need to understand the intention behind the content type that we are creating. So content use is an important principle in designing content types or content models. Content reuse, because we want to be able to create units of content that if there's these can be shared if it's continuously be found in multiple pieces, that they're able to create content pieces for reuse and be able to create this relationship between them. So if I have an image, a title and description almost always available in every single component, they need to be able to understand like, yeah, I can take this away, right? Because this is typically done by developers in traditional Sitecore when we build templates. Content authors doesn't care about that. They only consume templates. While in the Content Hub one, they're the one who's responsible for designing that. So they need to understand this concept. They need to understand the limitation of the content that they are building and somehow how that's might affect the design at the end of the day. And this is one of the things that I actually struggled with at the beginning when I was writing content for our website, because in my head, I know how the page looks like, right? And I would go and start to add content, but then once it's published and it's available on the website, I start to see like, yeah, the design system doesn't support that. So they need to understand, they need to be the one who said like, yeah, typically a title will take 2 to 3 lines. They communicate that for the front end team so they can follow what is expected by the content team rather than we rely on the front end team to provide us with these design limitation, unless like there's a specific limitation for display, for example. How easy it's going to be for them to create, update, delete these things in the future, and make sure that these are still tied to a customer journey, because they need from the beginning, from day one, these things are not only intended for marketers to understand who are the customers and what pages they're expected to go and visit content managers need to be involved as well. So just a quick walk through how this looks in Content Tab 1. So again, as we've seen in the home page, we have at the top our content type section. So it contains a list of the types that we've created in the system. By clicking on add a type, it allows you to add the name of this content type, and you start by adding fields. And obviously there is some extra details that's going to be generated by the system. Once you start by adding types and fields, you can define what type of a field you're going to end up having. You can see that you can define additional values for this field. For example, if it's required, display settings like how many characters it's going to have. You can reorder fields within your content type. You can even see the JSON preview, how these going to be sent over to you via the API, so you can have an idea of how that's going to look like. And you can change, delete, add fields as you want. Content authoring process is the same one that we know. There's a section called content where you can start adding content based on the types that you have created. You can search for the content that you've created. You can filter by type, and you can see it's a very simple interface. And this is what is expected by headless CMSs that focus on content. You can see it's like almost primitive, similar to a WordPress experience or something like that. Once you exclude all the fancy stuff that are required for design of seeing how that looks like, this is a simple view for content authors who just focus on creating content and content only without worrying how that's gonna look like. And based on the limitation or whatever constraints you have created, you should be able to see all of that. The media section allows you, similar to the media layer, to upload images, assets, and all of that, and can identify at which stage that content is. And content delivery, as we've discussed, has been broken down now between the delivery edge and the media management system. So both your application and the Content Hub 1 needs to interact with these layers for communication. So Content Hub 1 will publish content to the delivery edge, and your application will be fetching content from delivery edge. Same thing with the media item. And that's meaning that the way we look into content delivery, as mentioned, is totally different. So when you envision your infrastructure design for this one, you need to think of, just remove the need for a CD, for the scaled XP stuff, and just focus on what is needed for you to deliver that. Now, I'm going to be thinking how many edge layer I'm going to need. Is it one? Is it more? And it's still going through a process, right? Because I still need to have a workflow of creating content, make it available for review. Once it's published, it means it's now available either on your edge or on the media library. If something has changed, it means you can still see a preview of that content, but the version now on your delivery edge is an older one, and it has to go through another round of publish for it to be available for consumption. So, as mentioned, from a development perspective, your application will be interacting only with this layer through HTTP requests. So you're going to trigger an API call to either one of these endpoints, and Content Hub 1 will be communicating internally using APIs. So we'll talk about these two in a bit. Again, mentioning of APIs, it means there's a section in the setting where you can create and manage API keys for consumption. And we have two types of keys. This could be a delivery or a preview. So let's see the difference between the both. So the media management system works with either a media delivery API or an upload API. And the keys allows you to communicate either with the published content or with the preview content. So on my preview API, it communicates using JavaScript rendering SDK. The delivery API, same thing. So this entire section, whether I'm consuming this in my media or I'm using my delivery API, I can use that through JavaScript rendering SDK. While the operational part of creating assets, creating content, deleting, editing, all of that is done using the Content Hub one that consumes SDK or .NET based APIs. So all of this is our Content Hub one ecosystem, but there's a distinction in the underlying APIs that works either between Content Hub itself, which is these two things. These are the SDK APIs, and these two with your application, which are JavaScript rendering. So the Edge GraphQL API, that's the one that's available for delivery or for a preview. It consumes a GraphQL API endpoints. That means that you should be able to understand how to work and consume GraphQL endpoints. Your content management has been built using an open API standard. So it's, again, API first approach. Again, remember, our MACH architecture is also within the product or the CMS itself. It's been built to consume and use API in the first place. It gives you Swagger interface so you can see all the various operations that can use as part of your content management. Also provide this with a CLI, and this CLI again allows you to use it to do the content management manipulation. It helps you with serializing these content into your Git repo, content types obviously, and to use packages to migrate from one environment to the other. And then it still gives you a set of APIs, JavaScript, .NET SDK, that helps us with consuming that with any programming language that you're using in your application, right? So your application, and similar to the JSS or like the headless experience that we have, can use either JSS or JavaScript APIs, or we can use a .NET Core API. So your application doesn't mean it's only built by front-end developers. Your tech stack can only contain, for example, back-end developers, and you don't have enough resources for a front end. The system still allows you to consume these APIs because they share the same, for example, service layer, and you can consume that whether through your .NET application or through your front-end application. So why would we go with the headless CMS after just like reviewing all of that? Again, it helps us with having this independent experience between your backend and your frontend. It helps you quickly roll out a system to your market, right? And this is like very strong when you have your website on Sitecore, you have all your capabilities are done there. But then your marketing team asks you for a quick campaign landing pages, right? Like a small microsite, specifically for some campaigns that they want to be rolled out quickly. So instead of waiting you to go through your entire development process of, you know, doing your sprints, creating Sitecore templates, front end doing the design, technical team doing the implementation, right? You can just give them a headless CMS where they can do all their content authoring there, and your front end team can quickly spin up the front end pages and can call that quickly and make it available based on your needs. So there's a situation where, yeah, CMS or a headless CMS might not be for you. And this is a question that you need to keep always asking yourself and assessing. Having all of these as option doesn't mean one would replace the other. It means you still have an XM and XP. This is still a scenario that's valid for many industries and many locations and many businesses. There's lots of operations that doesn't need to host everything on a cloud, right? You're still working with banking system or financial institution that they need to have a deep or closer managing on the security of your application. You still work with clients that they have very hardened security that you can't even RDB to your production or even sometimes to your UAT, right? So XM and XP is still, as it sits today, the right fit for some industries. You have XM Cloud as an option. And this has been rolled out by Sitecore for all that everyone like in you, they would be given the option, okay, do you want to go with a cloud first approach? So it's going through an XM Cloud from the beginning. It's composable, it's far away from the monolith that we have been working with for some time now, right? Or you have another option, which just like go completely headless, go into a lightweight, agile CMS that's less cost, quicker to deliver, and you can use for your small microsites, for your small um, engagement that really needs like a quick turnaround, where marketers and business are in need of having a digital presence very quick with a cheap option, but it's still within your tech stack, within your Sitecore infrastructure and implementation. So again, these are options to select from based on your business need, rather than one thing would gonna end up replacing the other. And that's it for me for today.
Thank you, Ishraf, for the wonderful session. Um, and thanks to all the participants. Do we have any questions from anyone? Okay, we do not have any questions. I think we can close the session. And thanks for taking this time and explaining about Content Hub 1. It was very informative and helpful for us. You gave us very good insights, and thanks. Have a nice day and the rest of the evening. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for joining and for having me.